Right, so we just built a RESTful services to retrieve all the quotes or particular quotes. Let's go now focus a little bit on the client side to go and fetch some of this data. Right? Let's see. Let's go on WebStorm here, and notice that we have an admin. We have links that allow us to navigate to various detail pages and several summary pages and so on and so forth. Right? So let's just create a couple of pages for ourselves for both the details and the summary. Right? Let's see. In the component, we'll create a couple of components here, and we'll call it the quotes component, and we'll have the quote details component. Right? For the quote component, for now, let's just do some simple placeholder. And let's see, let's create a placeholder here for the quotes that extends React component that is just going to return, render. So for now, it's just going to do an h1 quotes. Okay? And this is export default quotes. And the same thing we're going to do for quotes details, but we're just going to change it to quote details. And this will be quote details and quote details. Just placeholders for now, right? So that we can see if we can navigate to those pages. So if you go to admin, we're going to add a couple of links here that will allow us to navigate to those two components we just built. We're going to have to load them first. We're going to import quotes from quotes. There it is, quotes. And we're going to load also quote details from quote details. And we're going to create a couple links that will allow us to navigate to those two brand new pages. One is going to be mapped to quotes, and one of these is going to be mapped to quotes, to the first quote in there, and this will be quote detail. So those are two links. Oops. There they are, quotes and quotes details. There they are, right? But if I click on them, nothing happens because there's no component mapped to them, right? So we're going to have to add a couple of things down below. We're going to create a couple of routes. Routes allow us to decide what component we want to render whenever a particular link or particular URL is activated. Right, so if I say admin quotes, I want to see quotes here, the quotes component. Right, so that if I click on quotes, notice that it renders the quotes component on the right-hand side. Right? I haven't done the details just yet, so let's do the details. So if I just copy this again, and this is quote quotes /1, sorry, placeholder for the ID. This will be quote details. Okay? So that if I click on quote details, I can now navigate between the two. Everybody okay? Okay. So what we'd like to be able to do is that when I come to these components, the first thing I need to go and fetch this data that I want to render in each one of these. Right? So let's first focus on quotes, retrieving all the quotes. Right? So let's do that. What we'll need to do is we'll need a service that can go out to the server, hit the RESTful service, and retrieve all these quotes. So for instance, in the services directory, we're going to create a brand new file called the quote service. Just like the quote service in Java, this is in JavaScript. Whereas that one is providing the data, this is actually going to fetch the data. Right? So to do this, we're just going to create a quote service as a class, and we're going to use a design pattern called the singleton design pattern, where we're only going to have one instance of this shared by everyone else. Right? So we're going to have a static instance, which is initially going to be null, and we're going to have a static function that going to instantiate it if it's already null. Otherwise, it'll just keep giving me the same instance over and over. Right? So if the instance is null, then we're going to instantiate it. Quote service. Otherwise, I'm just going to return this instance. Okay? Right? And I'm going to export it. So export default quote service. Okay? What we're going to do here is we need to programmatically hit that. We have to programmatically be able to hit this over here. We need to be able to hit that programmatically. So we're going to copy that, and we're going to create a function here, find all quotes. Notice that I'm calling all these functions the same. Right? I'm calling this function in the client. I'm calling it find all quotes. In the RESTful service, I'm calling it find all quotes. In the repository, I'm calling it the same. It's not required, but at least it just keeps my head straight on who's calling what. Right? So to go and fetch all this content from the RESTful service, we're going to use a function called fetch. Fetch takes as argument a URL, and it does what you think it does. Right? It goes and fetches. It creates an HTTP request. By default, it's a get HTTP request. If it's something else you need, like a post, a put, a delete, you have to explicitly configure it. But by default, it just does a fetch, a get. And what it comes back with here is not the data. It doesn't come back with the data right away with all the quotes. Instead, it comes back with a promise to eventually give you the data. Right? JavaScript has a single thread, and we don't want to risk it blocked waiting for this to come back. Right? So instead, what fetch does is that it delegates this to the browser, which has lots of threads, and says, go fetch this, right? And then notify me at some point in the future, right? And the API to do this asynchronous communication is what are called promises. And promises use the API then to be able to register a callback. When you come back, when the server finally decides to come back, call me back at this function, at this anonymous function, and give me the response from the server, because I want to extract the response. I want to extract the body of the response, and I want to convert it into a JSON object. Right? Hopefully, it'll be some nice array with lots of objects in there. Okay, I want to convert it into a JSON object, and that's what I want to return. That's what I want to return when it comes back. All right, excellent. We got that. And so now in the quotes over here, I want to use that service we just created, the quotes service, quote service. I'm going to instantiate it in my constructor. I'm going to instantiate that quote service. So the service is going to be quote service.getInstance. So this is going to be instantiated only once. After that, anybody who calls the get instance will get the same instance, which is a singleton pattern. Yes? And we're going to store it there. I'm also going to initialize the state of this component to have an empty list of quotes. On default, there are no quotes. But when the component loads, component did mount, when it loads, I'm actually going to go fetch the data. I'm going to say, hey service, you have a finder method in there. Go fetch me all the quotes. It's going to come back with a promise, right? And that promise will have the parsed JSON body, Right? Hopefully it'll be an array of quotes. Here's my quotes. And I'm just going to update my state so that it's now no longer an empty array of quotes. Instead, it'll be a filled-in array of quotes. You say this dot set state. I'm going to change the quotes to have the actual quotes that's coming. So this quote is this quote, and I'm updating the state of the quotes to be, instead of the empty array initially, and now I will have whatever quotes came back from the server. Is it okay? Once I have that, I can now render it. I can now render my quotes as a table. In a table body. I can iterate over the quotes in my state as a map. I can iterate over that. And for every quote in the map, in the array, I want to render a brand new table row. Right? That has to have a unique identifier. Each new element that I dynamically render needs to have a unique identifier. I can use the ID of the quote as a unique identifier. And actually render the table data, the actual quote dot, what do we have? Job description. Okay? Make sense? Instance is not defined. Did I misspell something? Static. No. Let. What don't you like? Static instance. I'm sorry? Oh, maybe here, this. Okay. Admin and quotes didn't seem to like it. Let's see. Let's debug this. Console access. Oh, okay. So the server is running on 8080 and my React is running on 3000. Right? So I'm violating one of the security issues of that the browser stops me going from one domain to the other. So we need to configure our server to be less secure. We'll say, don't worry, accept all origins. So I'll restart that. We can be more specific and say only accept from whatever, wherever your React server ends up running. Right? You can say only accept queries from that React server. Right? But here we're going to leave it open so that anybody can go and fetch the quotes. Make sense? Everybody okay? All right.